The frost clung stubbornly to the edges of the windowpane as the gray light of morning slipped across the wide Wyoming horizon. Out beyond the frost-bitten fields of Willow Ridge, a single plume of breath rose from a weathered man walking alone. Tom Whitaker, 59, adjusted his worn ball cap, the brim bent to near perfection, and tightened his grip on the thermos of black coffee that steamed against the bitter air. Duke, his border collie of nearly 12 years, trotted faithfully alongside him, every step precise and careful over the uneven, snow-dusted gravel path. The two moved without speaking, as they always did during morning inspection. This wasn't just a routine, it was a ritual. They walked the length of the old gravel runway, 3,500 feet of straight, stubborn testament to a promise made long ago. A promise Tom never once thought about breaking, even when every financial bone in his body screamed that he should have let it go years ago. Jack Whitaker, Tom's father, had carved the strip into this land with his own hands in the early 50s, arguing tooth and nail to get it listed on the county's emergency landing grid. A World War II bomber pilot turned wheat farmer, Jack believed that preparation was more than common sense. It was duty. When the skies go wrong, the ground better be ready, Jack used to say. And every winter since his father passed, Tom had held those words tighter than any bank ledger or yield forecast. The windsock atop the old pole fluttered to life as the sun peeked over the edge of the distant hills. It was cold out, damn cold, but Tom was used to it. Winters in Willow Ridge weren't for the faint-hearted, the kind of cold that stiffened joints and split tractor hoses. But it was also the kind of cold that reminded a man what he was made of. Tom stopped halfway down the runway, kneeling to inspect a slight rut in the gravel caused by last week's freeze-thaw. He'd need to drag that flat later, maybe drop a few bags of coarse gravel over the soft patch before the next snow. Duke sat beside him, ears perked toward the horizon like he was on sentry duty. "Still holding together," Tom muttered, more to his father than to himself. They finished their walk in silence. Back at the house, a modest two-story with siding that had seen better days, Tom peeled off his gloves and stepped into the kitchen, the dog's nails clicking softly behind him on the tile floor. The kitchen was clean but lived in, a worn wooden table in the center, and an old coffee maker that hissed every few minutes like it might give up the ghost. On that table sat a stack of envelopes, all bearing the same return address, Frontier Valley Bank. They'd been coming for months now, piling up like snowdrifts in his conscience. Final notices, warnings, demands. 3 payments behind, the latest due in 7 days. His breath fogged the kitchen window as he stood there staring at the paper mountain, wondering how many more mornings he'd get to walk that runway. Later that morning, Tom rolled into town in his rust-bitten Dodge pickup and parked in front of the Elk Ridge Diner. The same stool waited for him at the counter, third from the left, where he'd taken his coffee for over 20 years. Pete Lancaster, his brother-in-law and the region's most successful cattle rancher, was already there, nursing a cup of black and staring out the window like the mountains had something personal to say. "You hear about the Peterson place?" Pete asked without turning. Tom took a sip before answering. "They sell?" Pete nodded. "Westcor, full buyout. Cleared their debt, even gave them a move-out bonus. Bulldozers start next week." Tom said nothing, his jaw working quietly as he processed the news. Pete finally looked over, voice dropping low. "They're buying everything west of the highway, Tom, and don't fool yourself. They're coming east soon enough. You're on the list." "I'm not selling," Pete sighed, set his mug down. "You've got options, brother. You take their deal, they wipe the slate clean. Hell, they might even leave you a few acres to retire on." Tom's eyes darkened. "They bulldoze the strip, Pete." "They bulldoze a patch of dirt no one's used in 20 years, Pete countered. Tom pushed his cup forward. "It's not just dirt." Back at the farm, the wind picked up as Tom parked the truck beside the barn and went to check the backup fuel reserve. He'd noticed the pressure had dropped on the line this morning. Probably just the cold, but you didn't take chances with generators, not in weather like this. The hum of tires on gravel reached his ears before he saw the dust. When he looked up, a sleek black SUV rolled over the cattle guard and came to a stop in front of the house. Out stepped a man dressed like he'd gotten lost on the way to a boardroom, tailored charcoal gray suit, polished boots, Texas drawl that came out smoother than butter. "Mr. Whitaker," the man called, offering a well-practiced smile. "Caleb Monroe. I'm with Westcore Agri. Mind if I bend your ear for a few minutes?" Tom wiped his hands on a rag and nodded toward the porch. "You already drove out this far. Might as well say your piece." They sat at opposite ends of the wooden bench, Duke settling between them like a referee. Caleb launched right in. "We've reviewed your property. You've got what we call a transition portfolio, farmland in distress, but with potential. Your debt's significant but manageable. Westcore is prepared to buy out the note, clear your liabilities, and pay you a little something extra. More than fair, I'd say." Tom said nothing. Caleb went on. "But the runway, Mr. Whitaker, that's a complication. We'd need to remove it to maximize acreage. Gravel strips cut into yield numbers, that's just math." Tom turned his head slowly. "That runway's staying. Built it with my old man. Promised I'd keep it functional till the day I die." "I understand legacy," Caleb said, all smooth charm. "But legacy doesn't pay down principal. And let's be honest, how long can you keep this going? You're behind 3 payments. Next one's due in a week." Tom stood. "This place ain't for sale," he said flatly. "Especially not that strip." Caleb stood, brushing off invisible dust from his lapel. "Clock's ticking, Mr. Whitaker, and when it runs out, the bank will make the call for you." He left in a trail of gravel and silence. That night, Tom stood on the porch as the wind whistled low and cruel through the wheat stubble. He'd already seen the clouds gathering over the northwest range. Something about them wasn't right. Too heavy, too fast. He lit a cigarette, the glow like a single match in the dark. The phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. Jenny Martinez. "Tom," her voice crackled through the weak reception. "Just got word from the tower. Storm warnings lit up like Christmas. Canadian front pushing down hard, might be a bad one." Tom glanced up at the darkening sky. "Strip's clear," he said automatically. "Always is. Just a heads up. Take care." He hung up and stared out at the runway lights flickering in the wind. "One more winter," he said softly. "Just hold through one more damn winter." The wind shifted sometime around dusk, curling low over the wheat stubble and moaning through the trees like an omen. The sky had turned an unnatural shade of slate, the clouds swollen and pregnant with something that didn't feel like ordinary snow. Tom Whitaker stood at the top of the old windmill tower, 50 feet above the frozen field, his coat cinched tight and breath fogging in front of him. From this vantage point, he could see the curvature of the ridge, the rise and fall of the land he had lived on his entire life, and, more importantly, the ominous build of clouds over the northwest range. The barometer clipped to his belt had been dropping all day, but now it had nosedived. He glanced at the analog face again, a unit so old it still bore his father's initials scratched into the brass. It was now solidly in the red. Tom muttered under his breath, "Damn thing never lies." Climbing back down the windmill, his boots thudded against the cold rungs. Duke waited at the bottom, tail still but ears alert. He didn't bark, didn't have to. Both of them knew. Something was coming. Inside the house, Tom turned on the weatherband radio. Static hissed for a few seconds before the voice came through, serious and clipped. National Weather Service has issued a severe blizzard warning for western Wyoming, including Willow Ridge and surrounding areas. Whiteout conditions expected. Wind gusts up to 60 miles per hour. Travel is not advised. Prepare for potential power outages and infrastructure impact. He switched the radio off and took a deep breath, rubbing the tension from the back of his neck. This wasn't just a dusting. This was a freight train coming straight for them. He went to work. In the equipment shed, he checked the diesel generator, flipping the starter, and listening to it groan before settling into a low, steady hum. He topped off the tank, double-checked the oil, then trudged through the snow to stack more firewood inside the house, enough to last 3 days if the power went out. The wind clawed at his coat as he moved from outbuilding to outbuilding, securing shutters, testing the emergency LED runway lights. Solar-charged strips embedded along the gravel, blinking steadily in the growing dark. Duke followed close, never more than a few paces behind. "Old man Winter's coming in hot, Duke," Tom said, wiping snow off the generator's control box. In the barn, while gathering emergency feed, Tom passed the small office corner that still held his father's flight journal. He paused, snow still melting on his shoulders, and opened the battered logbook. Yellowing pages, handwritten entries in tight, careful script. One line, dated January 1976, stood out. "Don't prep for the storm you see. Prep for the one no one believes is coming." Tom read the line twice, then closed the book gently, fingers lingering on the worn leather cover. The airstrip outside was dark now. Snow had started falling. Fine, fast grains like powdered glass. The windsock snapped violently in the wind. Then came the headlights. A familiar black SUV crawled up the drive, tires crunching over snow. Caleb Monroe stepped out, this time without an invitation. He brushed snow from his tailored coat, as if he were swiping lint off a theater seat, and strode right into Tom's kitchen, like he owned the deed. "Thought I'd bring this personally," Caleb said, holding up a sealed envelope. "Timings moved up. Frontier Valley's board just accelerated your case. You've got 4 days now, not 7. Tom took the envelope without opening it, his jaw flexing. "That wasn't the deal." "Deals change, Mr. Whitaker, but West Corps' offer still stands." "Let me guess," Tom said, voice low, still contingent on bulldozing the airstrip. Caleb gave a nonchalant shrug, though his eyes flicked toward the storm outside. "Think about it before the storm buries your legacy." Tom didn't reply. The wind slammed the door shut behind Caleb as he left. Moments later, the power died. The lights blinked off in a heartbeat. Tom stood in silence for a second, counting. 1, 2, 3. Then the generator kicked in with a mechanical grunt. The house came back to life, dimly lit, but alive. The well pump hummed. The radio crackled back into static. The LED runway marker panel flickered. Tom pulled on his coat again and went outside. Snow stung his face as he trudged down the path, Duke at his heels. At the edge of the strip, he reached the control post and activated the emergency lights. One by one, the LEDs sparked to life, cold blue-white dots in a swirling sea of darkness. He stood there, staring out at the runway through the curtain of snow. "Still here, Dad," he whispered, "still ready." Back inside, he was pouring hot water over instant coffee when the radio crackled again. This time, it wasn't the weather report. "Whitaker Field, this is Jenny Martinez at Regional Dispatch. Tom, you reading me?" He snatched the mic. "Loud and clear. What's going on?" Jenny's voice came through taut. "Military radar just pinged your runway lighting. Something's in the air. Big, unscheduled." Tom's blood ran cold. "You think someone's trying to land?" "I don't know, but they're asking about your strip by name." Tom stared out the window. Snow pounded against the glass. The LED markers glowed like runway halos through the storm. "What the hell's up there?" Outside, the wind howled louder, as if answering him. And somewhere far above the clouds, engines roared in the dark. The wind had a voice now, not just the hollow, whistling kind that nipped at windows. It howled across the empty fields like something alive, something angry. Tom Whitaker stood at his back porch, thermal coveralls zipped to his neck, wool hat tugged down low. Duke, the aging border collie, sat pressed against his leg, ears flat, eyes scanning the swirling white veil rolling in from the north. It was coming fast now. Inside, the wood stove pulsed heat, but the chill was already seeping into the corners of the house. The generator rumbled steadily outside, a throaty confirmation that the lights and water would hold, for now. Tom stepped back into the kitchen and checked the radio. He turned the dial on the old Midland aviation transceiver that had been mounted by his dad back in the 70s. Its signal was scratchy at first, but he let it sweep through the static. Then, clear as a bell, it cut through. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Reach 762, C-17 Globemaster, en route to Idaho. Multiple system failures, navigational loss, hydraulic pressure dropping. Request emergency vectors. Repeat, mayday." Tom's hand froze, his jaw clenched. A C-17 out here? He grabbed the mic, thumbed the transmit button, and said calmly, "Reach 762. This is Whitaker Field. Private airstrip, 3,500 feet. Gravel surface, compacted. LED marker lights operational. Conditions are poor. Snow accumulation, strong crosswinds, but strip is holding. Static. Then a reply. Female, strong, steady. Whitaker Field, this is Major Eliza Monroe, Aircraft Commander. Confirm 3,500 feet gravel. Request visual confirmation of lighting. We are carrying emergency medical supplies and critical equipment. Permission to assess for emergency landing. Tom blinked. His knuckles whitened around the mic. Permission granted, Major. This ain't a runway built for Globemasters, but it's lit and ready. You tell your crew, you've got a shot. Understood, Whitaker Field. Approaching from the northwest. We'll make a low pass to evaluate. He dropped the mic on the table, grabbed his heavy coat, his flashlight, and raced for the tractor. The snow was deeper now, already drifted against the fence lines. Duke barked at the door but didn't follow this time. He knew the rules when the storm was this bad. The John Deere's engine coughed but came to life. Tom engaged the snowplow attachment and pushed out into the darkness. Each pass of the gravel strip was agony. The wind lashed across the flat land like a whip. Ice stung his cheeks through the cracked cab window. He watched the runway markers blink stubbornly through the storm, blue-white lights against the howling void. This airstrip had seen plenty. Emergency crop dusters, the odd hobbyist pilot, even a medevac chopper back in '98. But nothing like this. Nothing like a 500,000-pound military transport plane. The radio crackled again. Approaching visual range. Lights confirmed. Crosswinds fierce. Gear deployed. One low pass coming now. Tom killed the tractor engine and stepped down into the snow, flashlight raised high. He shielded his eyes as the blizzard intensified. Then he heard it. A low thunder, the kind that shakes your bones before it touches your ears. Through the curtain of white came two brilliant beams, landing lights. Then, impossibly, the vast silhouette of the C-17 roaring overhead like a freight train from the sky. It was huge, bigger than anything that should ever try to land here. The noise rattled the barn windows. Snow burst from the ground in swirling cyclones as the engines passed overhead. Tom didn't breathe until it was gone. Whitaker Field, this is Reach 762, came the voice again. Runway confirmed. Wind shear is strong but manageable. Braking systems degraded. Attempting emergency landing. Be advised, this will be hard. Tom sprinted to the edge of the runway, his flashlight cutting through the dark. The wind tried to rip it from his grip, but he held fast, waving wide arcs like a one-man ground crew. You got this, he muttered into the storm. Bring her home. The roar came back, deafening, apocalyptic. The C-17 descended fast, too fast. Rear wheels touched down first. The bird bounced, just a foot, but it was enough. Sparks flew from the undercarriage. The front gear collapsed. The aircraft slammed into the gravel, skidding, carving a trench in packed snow. Tom shouted uselessly as the plane barreled forward, brakes clearly shot. Nothing but friction now. 50 yards, 30, 15. It skidded to a stop just before the drainage ditch, its massive tail rising slightly as the momentum died. Silence fell, just the ticking of the wind. Then the mic crackled again. Whitaker Field, this is Reach 762. We're down. Minor injuries, no fires, cargo integrity holding. Request immediate ground support. We're carrying Class 3 medical cargo, time sensitive. Tom dropped the flashlight, heart racing. Copy that, Major. You just landed 500,000 pounds of steel on a snow-packed wheat field. Let's save some lives. He ran for the ATV, hitched the sled trailer, and roared across the snow as the storm howled behind him. Through the haze, red lights blinked along the spine of the C-17 like a pulse, like a heart that refused to quit. 10 p.m. The blizzard still raged outside, relentless and merciless, as if nature itself was testing the will of every soul within reach. The temperature had plummeted to 15 below zero, the wind chill slicing through layers like a razor. Snow whipped sideways in dense sheets, coating every surface in an icy glaze. Tom Whitaker stood at the edge of the runway, his breath fogging the air, a heavy-duty flashlight clutched in one gloved hand. Behind him, Duke waited by the ATV, ears perked, tail low. The massive silhouette of the C-17 sat hunched like a grounded giant, steam rising from its engines, blue LED marker lights from the strip, casting an eerie glow on its fuselage. Tom stepped forward carefully, boots crunching through the churned-up gravel and frozen snow. He aimed the flashlight beam at the cargo ramp. With a slow, mechanical whir, the rear door of the aircraft began to lower, groaning against the cold. Hydraulic mist hissed into the freezing night air as the ramp unfolded, revealing the cavernous interior dimly lit by emergency lighting. Figures moved in the glow, tired, frost-covered, but upright. The first to step into the open was a woman, her face half obscured by a flight helmet and scarf, eyes steady despite the storm's fury. She peeled back her hood. "Major Eliza Monroe," she said, extending a gloved hand. Her voice was hoarse but composed. "Commander of Reach 762. You must be Whitaker." Tom nodded, gripping her hand with firm, silent strength. "You made one hell of a landing, Major." Two more figures emerged behind her. "Tech Sergeant Cody Harper," said the shorter of the two, flashing a tired smile. "Combat medic. And this here's Lieutenant Travis Bingham, loadmaster in training. Hell of a first mission, huh, Travis?" Bingham managed a nervous chuckle, brushing snow from his shoulders. "Didn't think I'd almost die on a wheat farm." Monroe wasted no time. "Mr. Whitaker, we're carrying Class 3 biological materials, ventilators, trauma kits, and emergency generators. Some of it's temperature sensitive, must be secured within 90 minutes or we lose it all." Tom didn't miss a beat. "The barn's insulated, backup heat and a diesel generator are running. Let's move." Within minutes, Tom had the ATV fired up, and Duke leapt into the passenger crate like he'd trained for it. Harper and Bingham loaded the first pallets onto a sled trailer hitched to the rear, and the convoy set off into the storm, moving slowly but steadily toward the equipment barn. The trek was brutal. Snow stung like needles. Visibility was limited to just a few feet. But trip after trip, crate after crate, they moved the cargo. The barn's interior glowed warm thanks to Tom's propane heaters and generator. Monroe's crew worked like a well-oiled machine, tagging containers, setting up the mobile refrigeration units, and stacking boxes with surgical precision. Tom watched from the corner, half in awe. These weren't just pilots or soldiers. They were professionals, problem solvers, survivors, and they'd trusted his gravel strip with their lives. By the fifth trip, Bingham leaned against a beam, panting. "This isn't in any training manual," Harper chuckled, hauling another case. If it was, no one would sign up. Duke weaved between their legs, sniffing boxes, barking once at a clatter of tools before settling under a heating lamp. Around midnight, Tom led the core team back to the house. The warmth hit them like a tidal wave the moment they entered. Boots off, gloves drying by the stove, coats hung to steam beside the fire. Tom set a pot of old chili on the burner and poured mugs of black coffee. At the kitchen table, the crew finally relaxed. Monroe, now without her helmet, let her shoulders drop. "We lost hydraulics mid-descent," she said quietly. "Told the crew to brace. I figured we'd crater into the ridge. But then, those lights, your markers, they looked like runway halos." Tom reached for an old leather-bound book from a shelf and slid it across the table. Dad's logbook. He started it in '74, logged every change to the strip, every plane that landed here, even if it was just me bringing him fencing from Casper. Harper picked it up reverently. "This is beautiful. You kept it up all these years." Tom nodded. "Made a promise. Didn't think it'd matter someday. Guess I was wrong." He glanced across the table and caught Bingham staring. "Something familiar about you," Tom said. "Where you from, son?" Bingham hesitated, then answered, "South Bend, Indiana originally. But my mom, she grew up around here. Marie Whitaker." Tom's eyes widened. He leaned back, stunned. "Marie? You're Marie's boy?" Bingham nodded, now smiling faintly. "Didn't think I'd meet my great-uncle by crash-landing a cargo plane on his farm." Tom looked down, overcome by emotion. He rubbed his eyes, voice rough. "She used to run barefoot down that strip in the summers. Always tried to beat the horses. Damn." The kitchen fell silent for a moment. The only sound was the wind scraping at the windows. Then Monroe's radio crackled. "Command to Reach 762, come in." Monroe lifted the receiver. "Reach 762, go ahead." "Radar confirms your landing coordinates. Congratulations on the approach. But be advised, Westcorps and Frontier Bank agents are en route. ETA, 6 hours. Media interest is escalating. Tom stiffened. Media? What the hell for? There was a pause on the line. Because this wasn't just routine cargo. Your containers include the only regional supply of pediatric antivenom and portable oxygen units for NICU babies. Without them, 3 hospitals in Montana and western Wyoming shut down their critical wards by morning. The gravity of that hit like a punch to the chest. No one spoke. Tom stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the blinking lights on the C-17 still resting in his field. The storm had calmed slightly. Just a thin veil of snow now drifted past the glow. He said quietly, almost to himself, "That strip, it didn't just buy time tonight. It bought lives." Behind him, no one disagreed. 6:30 a.m. The wind had died down to a weary whisper, no longer screaming across the plains, but still slicing through layers like a knife dipped in ice. Tom stepped out into the muted gray of dawn, Duke trailing behind him. Snow blanketed everything. The barn roof sagged under the weight, tree limbs hung low, and the airstrip, though battered, still held form beneath the thick drifts. The LED markers blinked dimly under the frost, their blue-white glow pulsing like the quiet heartbeat of the land. Tom walked its length slowly, one boot crunching in front of the other, scanning for signs of damage or displaced gravel. Duke paused at the edge, nose twitching, before bounding ahead, tail wagging. The old dog, ever the guardian, seemed invigorated by the cold. Tom bent low and swept a gloved hand across a patch of half-buried gravel. Solid, still holding. He smiled faintly. "Still fighting, huh? Just like Dad built you to." Back inside, warmth radiated from the propane heater. In the kitchen, Monroe stood in front of the radio set, satellite comms humming beside her. She glanced up as Tom entered, eyes tired but resolute. "CNN just picked up our landing," she said. "Pentagon confirmed the cargo was successfully delivered. Your national news, Mr. Whitaker." Tom grunted, pouring himself a cup of stale coffee. The generator hummed faintly outside. One of the crew, Harper, he thought, fiddled with the antenna near the window, adjusting for a better signal. The screen on Tom's dusty old TV flickered, fed by a backup battery pack. Then it snapped into focus. A headline scrolled across the bottom. C-17 makes impossible landing on Wyoming farm. Medical supplies saved. Aerial footage played next, likely from a news chopper out of Casper, showing the snow-covered expanse of Whitaker Field. The sheer size of the C-17 against the modest outlines of barns and tractors made the miracle of the landing even more unbelievable. By 9 a.m., the first visitor arrived. A black Range Rover crunched its way up the long gravel drive. Chains clacked on the tires, steam rising from the hood as it rolled to a stop near the porch. Tom opened the door and stood on the steps, coffee in hand. Out stepped Cynthia Ellison, draped in a corporate wool coat and snow boots that had clearly never seen real snow before. Clipboard in hand, she adjusted her scarf and made her way to the porch. "Mr. Whitaker, I'm here to assess the property. Your grace period with Frontier Valley Bank has officially expired." Tom tilted his head. "You might want to wait a minute. You're standing on a federally protected landing site now." She blinked, visibly confused, as uniformed personnel passed behind the window inside. Monroe joined him on the porch. "Ma'am, this property was instrumental in a classified emergency operation. Colonel Bradshaw from Northern Command will be contacting your superiors within the hour." Ellison's grip on her clipboard tightened, but she said nothing further. Minutes later, another black SUV approached, Westcorps' branding just barely visible on the frosted side panel. Caleb Monroe stepped out, more put together than yesterday, but his eyes darted with caution. He removed his gloves, offering Tom a tight-lipped smile. "Mr. Whitaker, I want to extend my congratulations. What you pulled off was extraordinary." Tom didn't shake the offered hand. Caleb pressed on. "Westcorps would be willing to revise our proposal. Flexible zoning, possible preservation of the airstrip, partial use, of course. We understand its historical value now." "You called it inefficient," Tom said. "Just yesterday, before 8 people nearly died and 3 hospitals almost lost their lifelines." Caleb hesitated. Public sympathy fades, sir, and the bank still holds your note. You may have bought time, but not safety. Before Tom could respond, Monroe stepped outside again, flanked by Lieutenant Bingham and Harper. This airstrip just proved strategic national value, she said firmly. And your timing couldn't be worse, Mr. Monroe. We're under federal jurisdiction now. Any further negotiation should be directed through the Department of Defense. Caleb's facade cracked. He gave a curt nod and backed toward his SUV. Inside, the satellite phone rang. Monroe answered, eyes widening slightly. She handed it to Tom. Mr. Whitaker, this is Brigadier General Alan Townsend. Based on your airstrip's critical role in last night's operations, we're authorizing immediate designation as a strategic emergency landing facility. Effective today, this site falls under federal protection. Maintenance contracts will be issued. You're clear of foreclosure, retroactively. Tom nearly dropped the phone. And the bank? They're off your back, permanently. He hung up, stunned. The moment settled like warm light after a long storm. Lieutenant Bingham sat nearby, sipping coffee, watching him quietly. Tom looked out the window, toward the blinking lights beneath the snow. Your great-granddad said this strip would save lives someday. Guess he wasn't wrong. A hush fell over the room, broken only by the gentle hum of the generator and the flicker of the old television. But then, Caleb's voice, low and ominous, crept back in from the doorframe where he lingered. Mr. Whitaker, he said, not bothering to mask the warning, I hope you realize, this just made you a target. You're sitting on federally backed land in the middle of a corporate buyout zone, and some folks don't play fair. Tom's gaze didn't flinch. He looked to Duke, then to the glowing edge of his airstrip in the snow, and back to Caleb. Then they better bring more than a snowstorm next time. Caleb turned and walked off into the cold, his footsteps muffled by snow. Above, a drone camera buzzed faintly overhead, capturing footage of the hulking C-17 and the glow of Whitaker Field. Down below, the balance of power had shifted, and everyone watching now knew it. The farm that nearly fell silent had become the loudest voice in Wyoming, and Tom Whitaker, a widowed wheat farmer, had just changed the course of the valley with nothing but gravel, grit, and the promise of being ready. It had been 48 hours since the impossible became history. 2 days since a $500,000 C-17 had carved its landing through wind and whiteout onto a gravel strip barely recognized on federal charts. 2 days since Whitaker Farm, long known only to a handful of locals and a few resilient prairie dogs, became the focal point of national headlines and military chatter. The storm had finally moved eastward, but its mark remained. Thick drifts lined the fields like frozen waves. Ice clung to the tractor sheds and barn eaves. But the real change wasn't in the weather. It was in the hum of power generators, the crackle of military comms, the buzz of news drones circling overhead. What had once been a quiet stretch of wheat country was now a full-blown operational hub. Tom stood near the barn as morning light filtered through the dense gray sky, his breath visible in the frigid air. Around him, uniformed soldiers in fleece-lined parkas moved methodically. Military tents had sprung up beside his cattle shed. Technicians with U.S. Air Force patches were installing upgraded runway beacons and high-frequency antennae funded by the Department of Defense's emergency grant. The C-17 still sat parked at the far end of the runway, engines cold, tail elevated like the fin of a beached whale. A recovery crew had arrived at dawn, coordinating extraction plans while keeping the surrounding wheat field intact. Satellite vans crowded the drive, each with oversized dishes, and reporters eager to tell their version of the miracle landing. Tom glanced down at Duke, who sat patiently at his side, ears twitching with every new sound. The only thing louder than that plane landing, Tom muttered, is the damn circus it brought with it. Despite the activity, there was an odd peace in the air, the kind that came not from quiet, but from clarity, a sense that the world had shifted, and that someone, somewhere, had finally seen what Tom had protected all these years. Lieutenant Bingham walked up beside him, clipboard in hand and scarf tight around his neck. We've got the beacon install halfway done. FAA should have uplink confirmation by end of day. Tom nodded. You ever think your first field command would be on a snow-covered wheat farm? Bingham smirked. Honestly, sir, I figured Iraq, not Wyoming. But I'll take the cold over mortar fire any day. The two stood in silence for a moment before Bingham added more quietly, "Thank you for keeping this place ready." Tom grunted, brushing frost off his coat. "Just doing what I promised." But the peace was short-lived. Shortly after lunch, a black SUV pulled up the lane, tires chained, windows tinted. From it stepped Caleb Monroe, now wearing a thicker coat but the same smug smile. This time, he wasn't alone. Beside him walked a man in a dark suit and wool scarf, his lawyer presumably, and trailing behind, a woman with sharp cheekbones, wire-rimmed glasses, and a county-issued ID badge, Laura Hensley from the zoning board. Tom met them halfway up the driveway. "Good afternoon, Mr. Whitaker," Monroe began smoothly. "We were hoping for a brief conversation." "You're not on my guest list," Tom replied flatly. "This is Ms. Hensley. The county zoning board has flagged your property for review due to its rapid change in federal designation. There's a provision that allows us to examine usage under local ordinances." "A stall tactic," Tom said bluntly. Laura cleared her throat. "Technically, it's a procedural review triggered by land use transitions that may impact county infrastructure." "You mean Westcor found a loophole?" Caleb offered a practiced shrug. "Just keeping everyone honest." Tom held his stare for a long moment. "That airstrip saved lives. You really want to be the guy who shuts it down after that?" "Public memory is short," Caleb replied. "Legal precedence isn't." Later that evening, Laura Hensley returned, this time alone. She parked at the edge of the property and walked the last quarter mile in boots and a parka, carrying a small folder. Tom met her on the porch. "You left something behind?" "No," she said, pulling her scarf down. "Just wanted to speak off the record." She stepped into the kitchen, looked around the modest farmhouse, and sighed. "They're throwing everything at this, Tom. PAC money, board pressure, whisper campaigns. Westcor wants this land for a grain terminal. I'm supposed to vote against you next session." Tom poured her coffee but said nothing. She looked up. "I haven't decided how I'm voting. Depends on how this place looks after the dust settles." Before Tom could respond, the back door opened and in walked Jenny Martinez. "Hope I'm not interrupting," she said, brushing snow off her sleeves. She carried a thick folder marked FAA. "You're just in time," Tom muttered. Jenny laid the folder on the table and opened it. Turns out Whitaker Field was never formally delisted by the FAA. Some clerk forgot to push it through back in 2003, which means it's technically still recognized. Tom blinked. "You serious?" "Dead serious. And you kept it up better than some active fields. So if they want to challenge you, we've got grounds to punch back." Tom leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. Didn't know red tape could work both ways. "Sometimes it's not about fighting harder," Jenny said, smiling. "It's about knowing where to aim." The next morning, Major Monroe stood at the edge of the runway, facing a crowd of reporters wrapped in down jackets and holding boom mics. She cleared her throat. On the night of the 14th, a C-17 Globemaster made an emergency landing here. It carried life-saving supplies, and it made it because one farmer refused to quit on a strip most had forgotten. This is not just about geography. It's about readiness, resilience, legacy. The story spread like wildfire. Whitaker Field began trending. Runway Rescue lit up TikTok. Tom sat in his living room that evening, the hum of attention buzzing louder than any plane. He should have felt vindicated. Instead, he felt watched. Later that night, the generator choked. He and Bingham ran out, boots crunching through frost. "Something's wrong," Bingham muttered, lifting the lid. Sand, packed thick in the fuel intake. Tom's jaw tightened. Someone did this. Footage from military cams caught a truck leaving the scene. The plate, a subcontractor linked to Westcor. Coincidence, the company claimed. Tom stood in the cold, wind cutting through his coat. Duke growled beside him, low and steady. "They just got dirty, boy," Tom said. "Now it's war." He returned inside to find a plain envelope under the door. Inside, a photo of his father in 1975, standing proud beside the airstrip. scrawled in thick permanent marker on the back. Legacy or leverage, your choice. We're not done. Tom stared at the photo for a long time, then his voice broke the silence. They think this land's a transaction. He gripped the photo tighter. Time to remind him what it cost to build. The sun had barely crested the snow-capped hills when Tom stepped out into the brittle cold. The generator was purring again. A fresh diesel tank from the Air Force had arrived just before dawn. With frost still clinging to his beard, Tom walked toward the equipment shed, Duke close behind. The wind had eased, but the land held its breath, as if waiting. Inside the shed, Lieutenant Travis Bingham was crouched beside the gutted generator, tightening bolts with methodical care. His breath fogged up his safety glasses, and his jacket sleeves were blackened from oil. Tom nodded to him in approval. "How's she holding up?" "Solid," Bingham replied, rising to wipe his hands. "Fuel lines are flushed, filters changed, no more sand. Whoever sabotaged it didn't know you'd have a military crew patching it up by breakfast." Tom grunted. They know now. By midday, the Air Force Engineering Unit had begun installing a backup solar array on the barn roof, courtesy of the DoD's Emergency Infrastructure Team. Monroe had insisted on it. "It's not an outpost, Tom," she'd said, handing him the paperwork. "It's an anchor." And it felt like one. But not all anchors held you steady. Some dragged you down. That afternoon, while rearranging supply crates in the far storage room, Tom stumbled upon something unexpected. Behind the old breaker panel, tucked behind sagging insulation and cobwebs, was a rusted metal tin. Faded masking tape clung to the lid, and across it, in Jack Whitaker's neat handwriting, "To be opened when you're at a crossroads." Tom stared for a long moment. Then he opened it. Inside, a folded U.S. Air Force flag, a set of yellowed blueprints for the original Airstrip, and a cassette tape labeled Summer '74, after the meeting. There was also a letter, brittle with age, but carefully sealed. He took it to the kitchen. Bingham and Jenny Martinez were warming up over stew when Tom entered with the tin. Wordlessly, he put the tape into the old boombox radio that still sat on the windowsill. A click. Then static. Then Jack Whitaker's voice. "If you're listening, son, then something's put you right between legacy and loss. I built that strip, not because I thought planes would come, but because I believed people would need it someday. Don't give it up easy. There's more tied to that gravel than the sky." The room fell into silence. Bingham blinked hard. "He knew," the young man said softly. "Even then." The following morning, Tom opened his front door to find a manila envelope nailed to the porch post. Inside, an injunction, filed by West Corps Agri in conjunction with the County Zoning Board. The document sought to halt all federal work on the airstrip, citing concerns over environmental disruption and non-agricultural land use. At the bottom, a signature from Cynthia Ellison of Frontier Valley Bank. She was refiling foreclosure, now under a revised claim that Tom was engaging in unauthorized commercial development. Monroe reviewed the papers with narrowed eyes. "They're not coming for the land," she muttered. "They're coming for your will." Tom didn't flinch. Jenny returned later that day with someone new. Grant Roebuck, a former FAA regulator and aviation lawyer known for his unpolished charm and unshakable litigation record. He stepped out of a dusty pickup truck wearing cowboy boots and a bomber jacket. His handshake was bone-crushing. "You're not fighting a foreclosure, Mr. Whitaker," Roebuck said after one glance at the documents. "You're defending infrastructure that's now classified as strategically essential. They don't want a courtroom. They want to bleed you with paperwork. But guess what? I eat that for breakfast." Roebuck went to work immediately, drafting a counter-injunction that cited federal emergency protocol violations, interference with military logistics, and misuse of state agricultural policy. Tom watched the lawyer scribble notes on a yellow legal pad like a man possessed. "You charge by the word or by the war?" Tom asked dryly. "Flat rate," Roebuck replied, "and this one's personal." That night, they hosted a town hall in the equipment barn. Jenny and Bingham helped string up LED lights. Folding chairs filled fast with neighbors, reporters, even a state legislator. Bingham spoke first, detailing the night the C-17 landed. We weren't just losing power and altitude, we were losing hope. Then a strip of blue lights showed up through the snow. We made it because someone refused to let that gravel die. Then Tom stepped up. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. This strip doesn't just run through wheat. It runs through memory, through sacrifice, through my father's hands and my own damn boots. And I'll be damned if someone with a title and a budget tells me it ain't worth saving. The barn erupted in applause. A local reporter streamed the event live. By dawn, the hashtag #Save Whitaker Field was trending across the region. Back in the house, Tom sat alone for a moment with Duke by his side. The blizzard had cleared, leaving a moonlit calm over the fields. The radio crackled. Hoffman Field, this is National Guard Command, requesting strip status for medical emergency evac. Civilian chopper en route. ETA 18 minutes. Lander Regional blocked. Repeat, Lander Regional blocked. Tom didn't even hesitate. He grabbed his coat, flicked on the emergency lights, and turned to Duke. You picked the right dirt, soldier. Let's bring her home again. Outside, the wind whispered across the glowing runway. Not a sound of surrender, but of readiness. The Wyoming sky had gone bone white by midnight, the kind of empty hush that only settles after a storm's fury has passed, but before calm fully returns. The wind had quieted, but it left behind a crust of ice over the farmland, turning every surface into a mirror of frost. In that frozen stillness, Tom Whitaker stood by the barn's side door, watching the windsock flap gently under the dim orange glow of the security light. His breath fogged in front of him, his parka zipped high, Duke lying obediently at his feet, ears perked. Inside, the emergency radio buzzed alive again. Whitaker Field, this is National Guard Command, requesting strip status for medical emergency evac. Civilian chopper en route, ETA 18 minutes, snowpack blocking Lander Regional. Tom didn't flinch. He stepped forward, grabbed his handheld transmitter from his coat pocket, and responded, Roger that, Command. Runway is lit and compacted. Winds are light. Visibility fair. Ready for incoming. He looked down at Duke. We've got another one, boy. The old collie barked once and scrambled to his feet as Tom made his way to the edge of the airstrip. He turned on the emergency LED markers that still blinked through the snowdrifts like constellations in the earth. He pulled on his heavy gloves and walked slowly down the middle of the runway, flashlight in hand, sweeping arcs left and right like a conductor cueing the sky. Minutes passed. Then came the sound, a faint thumping, like a heartbeat echoing over the hills. The familiar rhythm of rotors slicing air. Tom raised his light higher. Out of the dark sky, a Wyoming Army National Guard Black Hawk emerged from the low clouds, its searchlights cutting through the snow haze. It hovered momentarily before descending in a slow, controlled drop. The skids hit the gravel with a solid crunch. Inside, medics moved with trained urgency. A nurse exited first, holding a heavily swaddled infant against her chest, oxygen mask in place. 2 flight medics followed with thermal crates, while the attending physician gave Tom a grateful nod as they moved toward the heated barn. Monroe appeared beside him, pulling her coat tighter against the wind. You're officially running a forward operating base now, Whitaker. Tom didn't even smile. He just said, was never about the field. It's about being ready. By morning, word of the infant rescue had already made the rounds on the emergency network. Reporters stationed at the perimeter picked up on the activity. A local photographer snapped the landing from a tree line near the fence, the photo uploaded to X, formerly Twitter, before sunrise. By noon, the photo had gone viral, the grainy image of a Blackhawk landing on a snow-packed farm field, a man in a parka waving a flashlight into the sky. NBC News picked it up next, then CNN, then Fox. Headline, Farmer's Runway Saves Infant During Snow Emergency. Tom's phone started ringing off the hook. He ignored them all. Jenny Martinez arrived before lunch, carrying the full FAA designation paperwork. Whitaker Field was now back on the Federal Registry, civilian and military. She hugged Tom tightly and whispered, "Told you the sky would remember." Major Monroe's Pentagon contact, Brigadier General Townsend, sent a formal letter declaring Whitaker Field a permanent joint civilian emergency landing facility. A federal survey team would arrive within the week to begin assessments for infrastructure reinforcement. But as the recognition grew, so did the stakes. In a sleek office building in Cheyenne, Caleb Monroe stood in front of a screen replaying the C-17 footage and the viral chopper landing. "We're losing the narrative," barked a senior executive. "The optics are killing us." Monroe held his ground. "Let me handle it." But behind closed doors, memos were exchanged. Target no longer viable due to media risk and federal entanglement. Terminate acquisition attempt immediately. The next day, Frontier Valley Bank rescinded its foreclosure notice. Instead, they offered Tom a new refinancing agreement, citing the increase in land value after federal designation. Tom barely glanced at the papers. "Keep your offer," he said. "I'm not selling, but I'll buy back what you nearly stole, with interest." Roebuck, the aviation lawyer Jenny had called in, filed a federal injunction blocking any further county-level interference in zoning. He cited not only the C-17 emergency landing, but also the infant rescue as evidence of critical regional dependence. "You're not just protected now," he told Tom. "You're precedent." That evening, Tom and Bingham sat on the porch, wrapped in heavy coats, mugs of coffee steaming between them. "Why'd you really keep it all those years?" Bingham asked. Tom stared out at the airstrip, now quiet again, lights blinking like distant lighthouses. "Because I couldn't save my dad from the war that followed him home, but I could keep the one place he built to feel useful. He said if one soul ever landed here safe, it was worth every shovel of gravel." Bingham looked toward the barn. "You saved a newborn tonight. That's a good start." They sat in silence, the kind that doesn't need filling. Duke lay between them, head resting on his paws, the night calm and watchful. Then headlights approached. A military Humvee rolled up the drive, dusted in snow. Out stepped Brigadier General Townsend in full uniform, carrying a leather folder. He shook Tom's hand with a firm grip. "Mr. Whitaker, I'm authorized to make this official. Your airstrip is now a permanent joint civilian emergency landing facility. The government thanks you." He handed Tom the folder, then paused. "Also, you've got a visitor waiting. Says he's family." Tom turned slowly. Standing at the far end of the drive, hands in his coat pockets, was a man with graying hair, eyes low but familiar. Michael Whitaker, his brother. Tom's jaw set. "Took you long enough." Fade to black. The sun hung low behind the thinning clouds as a quiet tension returned to Whitaker Farm. Patches of snow were beginning to melt, revealing the gravel beneath and the wheat stubble flattened by the storm's fury. The C-17 had been partially disassembled and would be airlifted out in stages. The flurry of activity had slowed to a steady hum, but the eyes of the world, and more importantly, the eyes of West Corps, had not looked away. Tom stood at the edge of the runway, hands stuffed in his coat pockets, Duke at his side. He squinted against the sunlight reflecting off the snowpack. The whir of a distant engine caught his attention. A black SUV crunched down the long gravel drive, tires parting slush and mud. The vehicle rolled to a stop near the equipment barn. Out stepped a man Tom hadn't seen in 25 years, Michael Whitaker. Tom's younger brother was broader now, gray at the temples, his posture stiff with uncertainty. He wore a city man's coat, expensive, dark wool, collar turned up against the cold. But there was no mistaking the hesitation in his step. He looked out of place, and yet, somehow, it seemed the farm had been waiting for this moment. Inside the house, they sat at the old pine kitchen table where their father used to read the Gazette every morning with a cup of Folgers. The same scratches were still on the surface, from years of elbows and coffee mugs and spilled engine diagrams. Michael removed his gloves slowly, laying them neatly on the table, his gaze settling on nothing in particular. "Didn't think I'd ever come back here," he said, voice rough, much less see it on national news. Tom crossed his arms, leaning against the counter. "You didn't even come back for Dad's burial, just a wire transfer and a signature on the deed." Michael flinched, the accusation landing hard. He didn't fight it. "I know, and I've regretted it every day since." The silence that followed was heavy with years. Tom poured 2 cups of coffee, no cream, no sugar, just as their father had made it. "So why now?" Tom finally asked. Michael sighed, curling his hands around the mug for warmth. "Because my son almost died landing on your strip, because I saw that plane come down and I realized all the things I thought didn't matter, they do, And because I couldn't sit behind another Boeing conference table pretending this place wasn't part of me. The crackle of the wood stove was the only sound for a moment. You said once this airstrip was a relic, Tom muttered. I was wrong. Later that afternoon, the two brothers walked the airstrip side by side for the first time since 1994. The snow had been cleared in strips by military equipment, revealing the deep tire marks where the C-17 had touched down. Michael stopped at the north end, staring at the old wooden sign still staked at the boundary, Whittaker Field. The lettering was faded, but unmistakable. Dad would have been proud, Michael said softly. Tom nodded but didn't reply. You kept your promise. Every damn winter. The moment was broken by the arrival of a certified letter. A courier in a county vehicle handed it off to Tom at the fence line with barely a word. Tom opened it under the porch light, the wind tugging at the pages. West Corps had filed for eminent domain, citing a rarely used clause involving agricultural necessity under state emergency provisioning. Tom scanned the legalese, jaw tightening. They're trying to say this land needs to be repurposed for mass-scale agriculture, that it's too critical to be in the hands of one man. Michael looked over his shoulder, reading the highlighted phrases. It's political. They can't beat you through the courts, so they're going through the legislature. Backdoor play. Tom sighed, folding the letter with the deliberate calm of a man who'd seen storms come and go. And the bank will back it if the value looks high enough. That evening, Jenny Martinez arrived with Monroe and Roebuck, the aviation lawyer. They huddled around the kitchen table with a stack of files and maps. Roebuck, in his dusty boots and FAA cap, scanned the filing and swore under his breath. They're fast-tracking it through committee, using emergency food security statutes to justify the seizure. Dirty trick. We need a counterpunch. Monroe tapped the map. Senator Arlene Dubois might help. Independent, veteran-friendly. She's been following the C-17 story. If she hears from Tom directly, and maybe from someone who left this place and saw the other side of things. She looked toward Michael. Michael hesitated. You want me to testify? Tom raised a brow. You said you came back to fix things. Here's your shot. The next morning, they prepared for the trip to Cheyenne. Bingham loaded up the truck while Tom packed a small leather folder. Before closing it, he tucked in Jack Whittaker's logbook and a folded letter he'd written the night before, addressed to no one in particular. If you're reading this, you're wondering why some old fool kept this gravel alive. It wasn't about planes. It was about having a place ready when nobody else is. Signed, Thomas Whittaker, farmer, son, watchman of runways. Before they pulled out, Monroe handed Tom a phone. Pentagon's monitoring the hearing. If they try anything, we'll be there. Tom looked at Michael in the passenger seat. You ready to tell the truth? Michael adjusted his collar, looking older and somehow more grounded. Yeah, I'm ready to tell the world why I was wrong. The engine roared to life as they rolled out onto the county road. Snow flurries danced behind them, the gravel airstrip fading in the rearview mirror like a sentinel watching them go. The battle wasn't over, but the Whittaker brothers were no longer divided, and this time they were heading into the fight side by side. The grand rotunda of the Wyoming state capitol in Cheyenne pulsed with a mixture of nerves and cameras. Marble floors echoed with the footsteps of aides and senators, their hushed conversations ricocheting beneath the dome. It had been 1 week since West Corps filed its eminent domain claim, and now, under the fierce glare of national media, the battle for Whittaker Field had reached its final stand. Inside the public hearing room, a sea of reporters, activists, and everyday citizens packed into rows of chairs and lined the walls. Tripods and boom mics jostled for space. C-SPAN streamed live. Major Monroe, Jenny Martinez, and Lieutenant Travis Bingham sat in a reserved row, backs straight, eyes forward. Tom and Michael Whittaker sat shoulder to shoulder behind the speaker's podium, their expressions somber, weathered, but resolved. Senator Arlene Dubois, an independent with a reputation for blunt honesty and small-town grit, called the hearing to order. This hearing of the Senate Agriculture Subcommittee is now in session. The floor recognizes Mr. Thomas Whittaker, farmer and civilian airfield steward from Willow Ridge. Tom stepped up to the microphone. The room quieted to a pin drop. He took off his hat, placed it gently on the podium, and looked out over the sea of faces. He cleared his throat. "I'm not a man used to microphones or marble walls," he began, voice rough with the plainness of truth. "I'm used to dirt, to wind, to gravel under my boots and diesel on my hands. I don't have numbers for you. I have stories." He paused. "On the night of the blizzard, a £500,000 C-17 landed on my farm. Not because I had permission, not because it was convenient, but because we were ready. Because my father said, years ago, someday this place will be needed. Keep it ready." We did. And that plane brought medicine for babies in NICU wards, trauma gear for snowbound clinics, and a crew of good people who might have died anywhere else. A murmur of support rippled through the room. Tom continued, slower now. "Westcor says my land is inefficient. The bank calls it non-productive. But I ask you this. How do you measure the worth of a life saved? How do you log the yield of a gravel strip that gives someone a second chance?" The room went quiet again. One camera lens zoomed in on Bingham, whose eyes were glassy. "You want to talk acreage? Fine. This strip isn't just 3,500 feet of stone. It's sacrifice, legacy. My dad built it with his hands after flying in World War II. I maintained it, not because I had the money, but because I had a promise. And I will not let some spreadsheet erase what blood and duty carved into that ground." Thunderous applause erupted. The chairwoman gave a sharp gavel knock, but didn't hide her smirk. Then Michael Whitaker stood. His voice, smoother but no less heartfelt, carried a different weight. "I was the brother who left," he said bluntly. "I walked away from this farm 25 years ago because I believed the world lived in boardrooms and cities. But when my son crash-landed on this field, when I saw that runway glow through the storm, I realized I'd been wrong. That the future isn't just innovation. It's preservation. It's honor. It's keeping the light on for the ones coming in from the dark." A stillness followed, then another surge of applause. Over the next 2 hours, Jenny Martinez testified with FAA records confirming Whitaker Field had technically never been delisted. Monroe spoke with calm authority, describing how her flight plan rerouted them to the field during the blizzard. A military rep read a brief from Brigadier General Alan Townsend stating Whitaker Field's new federal designation and its critical role in the region. The turning point came when Roebuck, the ex-FAA regulator turned lawyer, presented leaked emails showing Westcor lobbying for expedited seizure authority before the C-17 landing had even occurred. Their move wasn't strategic necessity. It was premeditated expansionism. Social media exploded. The Save Whitaker Field trended for the 3rd time that month. NICU nurses posted videos of infants breathing because of oxygen flown in that night. Veterans shared their own stories of improvised landings and the importance of emergency strips. By the end of the hearing, Senator Dubois addressed the room. "In the interest of national security, rural sovereignty, and plain common sense, I recommend the motion to permanently protect Whitaker Field under federal emergency jurisdiction, effective immediately." 3 days later, Westcor withdrew its eminent domain filing. Internal memos cited public backlash, legal entanglements, and image management risks. Frontier Valley Bank, seeing their PR nightmare balloon, offered Tom refinancing with generous terms. Tom declined. Instead, he paid off the balance in full with the aid of a federal maintenance stipend and donations from a nationwide fundraiser started by a vet in Ohio. The following month, a dedication ceremony was held at Whitaker Field. A new sign rose from the packed earth. Whitaker Field, Esto. 1974. Strategic Civilian Air Lifeline. Michael stood beside Tom, Duke lying at their feet. Monroe gave a crisp salute. Bingham, now reassigned to a base near Riverton, helped cut the ribbon. When asked how it felt, Tom only smiled. "Feels like Dad just landed home again." 1 year later, a permanent exhibit opened at the Wyoming State Museum. Among the displays, Jack Whitaker's logbook, Duke's weathered collar, a twisted bit of gravel from the original strip, and grainy footage of the C-17 making the impossible descent. In the corner, a group of school kids stood before a looping video of Tom waving a flashlight through a blizzard. Their teacher said quietly, "This is what it means to keep a promise. Not for money, not for glory, but for the moment someone, somewhere, needs a place to land." And high above the plains, under wide Wyoming skies, Whitaker Field stood ready, lights gleaming through whatever storms might come. The storm had long since passed. The snowbanks had melted, the cameras packed up, and the noise of helicopters and headlines faded into a softer, steadier hum of everyday life. Yet the gravel runway still stood, unchanged, unbothered, and unwavering, just like the man who refused to let it disappear. Tom Whitaker didn't become a hero because he went looking for glory. He didn't keep the lights on for the applause or the news crews. He did it for the same reason his father once carved that airstrip out of frozen Wyoming earth with nothing but resolve and a rented bulldozer to be ready when the world wasn't. In the end, that's what it all came down to: readiness, commitment, legacy. Whitaker Field didn't just save a military cargo plane in the middle of a whiteout. It didn't just deliver medicine to NICU infants or rescue an infant by emergency chopper when all other options were gone. It did something deeper. It reminded us of a forgotten truth in this modern world. Sometimes the smallest, most overlooked places hold the greatest power. Sometimes the people who seem quietest are the ones who step up when everything else fails. And sometimes the gravel strip a man swore to maintain until the day he died becomes the last lifeline when all others fall silent. Tom's story is about a man holding the line, not with speeches or politics, but with his own two hands, year after year, storm after storm. It's about saying no when greed comes knocking, about believing that doing the right thing is enough, even if no one's watching. But the world did watch, and what they saw wasn't just a plane landing, it was a promise kept. And maybe that's the lesson for all of us. In a world obsessed with progress, with speed, with tearing down to build bigger, there's still room for people who preserve, who protect, who dig in their heels and say, "This matters, and I won't let it go." Whitaker Field became a symbol not just of survival, but of purpose. So if you take anything from this story, let it be this: you don't have to be the loudest to make the biggest impact. You don't need permission to keep your promise, and you never really know when something you've held on to out of love, out of honor, might end up saving someone else's life. Now, it's your turn. What part of Tom Whitaker's journey hit you the hardest? Was it the silent standoff with West Corps, the moment that C-17 touched down in the blizzard, the discovery of his brother's son among the crew? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read everyone, and your voice keeps these stories alive. And if this story moved you, even just a little, do us a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell so you never miss our next story. Until then, stay ready, stay grounded, and remember, sometimes the most ordinary places carry the most extraordinary purpose. See you in the next chapter.